So I'm about a quarter of the way through the campus rape frenzy, and it's a pleasure to read such a well-referenced and extensively footnoted book, and at the same time it's infuriating at what US colleges have done to due process rights under the direction of the Obama administration. Now, I'm sure I'll have more videos on this book once I get to some of the specific cases, but for now this video will be about how the frenzy was manufactured through statistical misrepresentations and outright falsehoods. And for this I will draw on Chapter 2 of the book, Misleading Through Statistics. So the book lays out 5 myths as follows. 1 in 5 female college students will be sexually assaulted. 2 The number of rapes on college campuses has grown alarmingly. 3 A college campus is a more dangerous place for female students than the off-campus environment. 4 A relatively small number of serial predators commit 90% of rapes on college campuses. And 5 Between 90 to 98% of accused students are guilty. Thus, a cursory disciplinary process with minimal due process is good enough. So in this video, I'm going to address 4 out of those 5 myths. So first off, you've no doubt heard about the 1 in 5 statistic. That statistic comes from a study in 2007 based on a survey given at just 2 universities. For starters, the response rate was low. Less than half the women invited to participate did so. Remember, the response rate at the Australian Human Rights Commission survey was less than 10%. Students were not asked whether they were sexually assaulted. The study used overly broad definitions. For example, you were counted as a victim of sexual assault if you had experienced rubbing up against you in a sexual way, which obviously would include just about everyone who's ever been on a crowded dance floor, or had intimate encounters while even a bit intoxicated. And they make a good point about the term unwanted. Unwanted is how respondents felt about an encounter, not whether they communicated to the other party that it was unwanted. Also, the survey included incidents that had not happened on campus and had not involved other students. Even the lead author of the study was quoted as saying, "We do not think that 1 in 5 is a nationally representative statistic." Then in 2015, another much larger survey showed similar rates of 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 rates of sexual assault. Again, the response rate was very low, 19%. 2.2% of female respondents said they had reported to their schools that they had been penetrated without consent since entering college, which means in a nation with 10 million female undergraduates, over 5 years there would have been 217,000 student reports of penetration without consent, plus many more reports from other categories of sexual assault. But that's between 10 and 11 times the number of students who actually did report sexual assaults to their universities from the relevant period 2010 to 2014. So either the data is enormously unrepresentative, or women who told researchers they reported it to their schools were lying. Again, this survey used extremely broad definitions. For example, if you answered yes to any of the following questions, it was counted as sexual assault or sexual misconduct. Have you experienced forced kissing? Unwanted sexual touching, which could include attempted close dancing while fully clothed. Promised rewards for sex. Threats to share damaging information about you with friends. And because the survey failed to define the word incapacitated, respondents could assume they should answer yes, even if they'd only been a little bit drunk. More than 3/4 of respondents who said they had been penetrated using physical force said they had never reported the incident, and 59% said they did not consider it serious enough to report to either the college or the police. The only plausible explanation being that most students didn't feel what happened to them constituted sexual assault. And of course we know that this is a form of internalized misogyny. Now, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is considered the gold standard on such survey research, suggests about 1 in 40 female college students is sexually assaulted over 4 years. In 2014, the Bureau of Justice Statistics suggested 0.61% of female college and trade school students were sexually assaulted per year, of which 0.2% are raped. Non-rape sexual assaults included unwanted sexual touching, attempted rape, and threats. And these numbers don't say where the alleged offence occurred or whether the alleged perpetrator was a student at the alleged victim's school. The Bureau of Justice survey also uses large sample sizes, and the response rate in 2013 was about 88%. So remember, if the 1 in 5 statistic were accurate, that would mean about 400 to 500,000 female college students would be sexually assaulted every year. The actual number reported by the CLERY Act was an average annual rate of between 4,500 to about 5,300 from 2012 through 2014, about 100 times less than the 1 in 5 statistic would indicate. Now, sure, there is some element of underreporting, but 100 times? Doubtful. Now, the authors go on to speculate that the 1 in 5 claim may have received undeserved credence because of the high number of sex-related complaints filed by female students at elite colleges and universities. The same CLERY Act data suggests the highest sexual assault rates are at elite institutions, which they note are also far more steeped in activism than other institutions. And they pull out some interesting numbers. In 2014, 1 out of every 181 female Ivy League undergraduates reported they'd been raped to their university, over 3 times the rate of 1 in 665 at nearby non-elite institutions. Dartmouth College had the highest percentage among Ivy League schools of 1.41%, which means a female undergraduate at Dartmouth is more likely than a resident of Memphis, Tennessee, the nation's second most dangerous city, to be a victim of a violent crime. Amongst elite liberal arts colleges, Wesleyan College had the highest percentage of 2.4%, which would mean a female undergraduate at Wesleyan is substantially more at risk of being a victim of violent crime than is a resident of Detroit, the nation's most dangerous city. Yet neither the president of Wesleyan or Dartmouth have called for a greater presence of law enforcement on campus. But I think the best example is Occidental College in LA. In 2012, there were reported 10 sexual offences. The following year, a handful of faculty members and student activists promoted the idea of rape culture dominating the campus, and the number of offences magically shot up to 60, meaning 5% of Occidental's female students were victims of violent crime, making it one of the most dangerous places in the country. None of these claims has even resulted in a criminal charge, let alone conviction. Then in 2014, the activist coalition fell apart due to ideological infighting, and the number of rape reports fell to 8. Strange how that happened. Now to the idea that the rate of rape has grown alarmingly. A special report by the Bureau of Justice showed the rate of sexual assault had more than halved from 1997 to 2013, which is in line with the drop in all violent crime over the same period. That same special report also refuted the idea that women on college campuses were at greater risk. For rape and sexual assault, non-students were 20% more likely to be victims. The authors state this bias is a class issue. Off-campus rape victims are disproportionately poor or lower middle class. Women in the lowest income bracket are 6 times more likely to be sexually victimised than those in the highest income bracket. And we see the same pattern when feminists argue for job quotas in high prestige, high-paying jobs because their concern is only for those women like themselves. Now, the other myth I'll deal with here is the claim that only a small percentage of reported rapes are false. The authors note in the Hunting Ground documentary that they make the claim that 95 to 98% of rape claims are not false. Now, the best known source for this is Susan Brownmiller's 1975 book, Against Our Will, which cites a 2% rate. And I've covered this before in a previous video, so here it is again. And here's a little neat summary of Susan Brownmiller's claim from Bloomberg. Her citation for this figure, the 2%, is a single speech by an appellate judge before a small group of lawyers. His source for this statistic was a single area of New York that started having policewomen conduct all rape interviews. This is not data. It's an anecdote about an anecdote. And that's right, Brownmiller was able to produce a transcript of that speech, but no one involved in writing the speech could remember or find a study or any data for that matter to back up that claim. And yet this flimsiest of flimsy sources is where feminists get their 2% figure from. And then there is the by now thoroughly discredited David LISAK, who reported in a 2010 study of an unnamed Northeastern university that the false accusation rate was 5.9%, and that was only if a thorough investigation had determined that key elements of a victim's account of an assault were internally inconsistent and directly contradicted by multiple witnesses, and if the victim then altered these key elements of his or her account. So obviously you can't just claim that therefore 94% are true. As LISAK's study showed, only 35.6% of accusations were credible enough to be adjudicated. Those that fell in between had either no evidence or conflicting evidence, or there was insufficient information to classify them. For example, LISAK classified as not false accusations in which the victim mislabeled the incident, that is, they gave a truthful account, but the incident did not meet the legal definition of sexual assault, which law enforcement would treat as unfounded. Unbelievably, LISAK said in 2007 that he wouldn't classify the Duke lacrosse case as a false accusation. Another study similar to LISAK showed a 7% false accusation rate, with the standard being that only after a thorough police investigation it was proven false, while stunningly the authors noted that it was probably a waste of limited resources to thoroughly investigate rape claims for falsity. Also, they added that even to alter or exaggerate the details of what happened to create a case that seems more believable, or to report that the suspect used a weapon when this is not really true, or to describe threats of violence that were not really made, did not render a claim false. In this study, only 20% of the claims proceeded to any kind of adjudication. In contrast, a study in 2016 examining 351 confidential files from police concluded 17% of the allegations were fabricated, with another 66% uncertain. A 2014 report by the Defence Department's Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office found that 19% were classified as unfounded. A 2012 study estimated that of 227 men convicted of rape for whom DNA evidence was available and usable, 15% were eliminated as the source of the evidence. The authors also cite the Canon survey I talked about in my previously mentioned video that showed a 41% false allegation rate. Now, it's hard to get a grip on false allegation and victimisation rates for that matter, but I'd be willing to bet that 1 in 5 is a more accurate statement of the false reporting rate than the sexual assault victimisation rate. Anyway, that's a brief look at Chapter 2 of the Campus Rape Frenzy. As I said, I'm sure I'll have more to say on this book when I finish reading it. And just before I go, some potentially good news. Last week, the University of Georgia Board of Regents approved wide-ranging changes in the sexual assault policies at the campuses it oversees. The revisions were designed to strengthen oversight, assure a consistent process for all cases, and place more emphasis on prevention and education. Among the changes are victim-centered investigations. Investigations based on the always believe the victim model are often implicated in lawsuits by accused students against universities. An analysis of these lawsuits concluded that victim-centered approaches are inconsistent with the most basic notions of fairness, repudiate the presumption of innocence, and are likely to lead to wrongful determinations of guilt. Also, as Diana Davison reported yesterday in an absolutely atrocious case of false allegations, the judge in that case said in her ruling that,
although the slogan, "Believe the victim," has become popularized of late, it has no place in a criminal trial. To approach a trial with the assumption that the complainant is telling the truth is the equivalent of imposing a presumption of guilt on the person accused of sexual assault, and then placing a burden on him to prove his innocence. That is antithetical to the fundamental principles of justice enshrined in our Constitution and the values underlying our free and democratic society. Well said.
So, is some sanity returning to the debate around sexual assault, or will the barrage of activist misinformation continue to dominate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.